I stood in the rain outside the house I helped build, holding two suitcases, while the woman who was about to take my place watched from the window I used to clean every Sunday morning. 10 years. 10 years of my life, and he handed me a garbage bag and told me to hurry up. But 3 days later, everything changed, and this time I was the one smiling. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever given everything to someone and still felt like it wasn't enough, hit that follow button right now because this story is for you. And if you believe that loyalty should never be repaid with betrayal, drop a comment and let me know you're watching because by the end of this, you're going to need to say something. My name is Denise. And for 10 years, I was a wife who believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed that if I gave enough, stayed patient enough, and worked hard enough, everything would eventually be fine. I was wrong, but it took losing everything to understand just how wrong I was. I met my husband when I was 24 years old. He was charming back then, full of big dreams and bigger promises. He had this small business, barely making enough to cover rent, but he talked about it like it was already an empire. I believed him. I believed in him, and when he asked me to marry him 2 years later, I said yes without a single doubt in my heart. In the beginning, we had nothing but each other. I remember the small apartment we lived in, the one with the leaking faucet we never had enough money to fix. I remember working two jobs just so we could keep the lights on while he poured every dollar we had into his business. I never complained, not once. Because I believed that this was what marriage meant, building something together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I gave up my own career for him. I had a good job once, something I actually loved, but he needed help managing the business side of things, the paperwork, the contracts, the late-night phone calls with suppliers. So I quit. I told myself it was temporary, that once things picked up, I'd go back to what I loved. That day never came. Instead, I became the backbone of everything he built, working behind the scenes with no title, no salary, and no recognition. I did the books. I handled the emails. I dealt with angry clients when he was too busy to answer his phone. I was his wife, his employee, and his silent partner, all without a single piece of paper proving it. But there's something else I carried during those years, something heavier than any business struggle. For years, my husband and I tried to have a child. We went through appointment after appointment, doctor after doctor, and each time the answer was the same: it wasn't happening for us. I remember crying in hospital parking lots after appointments, staring at my own reflection in the car window, wondering what was wrong with me. I remember the holidays where everyone else's family grew bigger while ours stayed exactly the same. I remember my husband's silence during those years, a silence that slowly started to feel like distance instead of support. At first, he told me it didn't matter. He said we had each other and that was enough. But as the business started growing, as money started coming in, I noticed something shifting in him. He started talking about legacy, about needing someone to pass everything down to, about wanting a family that looked complete in photographs. Every time he said those words, I felt smaller, like I was failing him in some way I couldn't control. I carried that guilt quietly, the same way I carried everything else in our marriage without ever putting it into words. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I loved him. I stayed because I believed the years we built together meant something. I stayed because leaving felt like giving up on everything we had sacrificed for. And then the deal happened. It came out of nowhere, or at least it felt that way to me. A group of investors had been watching his business for months, quietly studying the numbers, the growth, the potential. One evening, he came home and told me, almost breathless with excitement, that they wanted to invest $33 million into the company. 33 million. I remember staring at him, trying to process the number, thinking about all those years of instant noodles and second-hand furniture, all those nights I stayed up doing spreadsheets by candlelight because we couldn't afford to keep every light on. This was it. This was the moment everything we sacrificed for was finally paying off. I hugged him that night like it was the happiest moment of my life. I told him we did it, we finally did it. He smiled back, but something in his eyes felt distant, like he was already somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't invited. Over the next few weeks, everything moved fast. Lawyers came in, meetings happened behind closed doors. He started staying late at the office, sometimes not coming home until well after midnight. I told myself it was normal, that closing a deal this big required sacrifice, the same way we had sacrificed for years to get here. But slowly, the man I married started disappearing in front of me. He stopped talking to me about the business the way he used to. He stopped asking my opinion on decisions I used to help make. He started taking calls in another room, lowering his voice whenever I walked past. I noticed a new name coming up more often in his conversations: Renee. At first, I assumed she was just one of the investors, someone helping manage the deal. I had no reason to think otherwise. Why would I? 10 years of marriage doesn't just prepare you for betrayal, it prepares you to trust. The night before everything fell apart, I remember cooking dinner the same way I had for years, waiting for him to come home so we could celebrate the deal finally closing. He walked in late, barely looked at me, and told me we needed to talk. I remember my stomach dropping, some instinct inside me already knowing something was wrong before he even said a word. He told me the business had grown beyond anything either of us imagined, and that with growth came changes. He said he needed a partner who could match his vision moving forward, someone who understood the corporate world, someone who could give him what I couldn't. I asked him what that meant. He looked at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw no love in his eyes at all. He told me he wanted a divorce. He told me Renee, his new investment partner, was more than just business to him now. And then the words that broke me completely, he said I could never give him what he truly wanted: a real family, a future, someone who could carry his legacy forward. I stood there in our kitchen, in the home I had helped pay for with every sacrifice I had ever made, and I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. 10 years erased in a single conversation. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted me gone immediately. He said Renee would be moving in within days, that the house needed to be ready, that I needed to pack my things and leave by the end of the week. I begged him to reconsider. I reminded him of everything we built together, every sacrifice, every hard year we survived side by side. He didn't care. He told me the business was under his name, the properties were under his name, and legally I had no claim to any of it. He said this like it was a fact he was proud of, like erasing me was simple arithmetic. 3 days later, I was standing outside in the rain with 2 suitcases, everything I owned crammed into bags I hadn't used since our honeymoon. I watched Renee's car pull into the driveway, watched her step out like she already owned the place, watched her look at me through the window with something between pity and satisfaction. My husband didn't even walk me out. He sent someone from his office to make sure I left quietly, like I was an employee being escorted out after being fired, not a wife of 10 years being thrown away like garbage. I had nowhere to go. My family lived hours away, and pride kept me from calling them immediately. Instead, I called my closest friend, a woman named Michelle, who took me in without asking a single question. I remember sitting on her couch that first night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my entire identity had been stripped away in 72 hours. I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was losing the only life I had built as an adult. I had no job of my own, no savings under my name, nothing to show for 10 years except heartbreak and exhaustion. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I barely ate, I barely slept. I kept replaying every year of our marriage, wondering what I could have done differently, wondering if the years I spent unable to have children were somehow the real reason behind all of this, even though deep down I knew that wasn't fair to myself. Michelle kept telling me I needed to fight back, that I deserved better than being erased like I never existed. But fighting felt impossible when I had nothing to fight with. Then, on the third day after I left, something happened that changed everything. I was going through an old box of paperwork Michelle had helped me grab in the rush of leaving, mostly old documents I assumed were useless. Tax papers, old contracts, things I signed years ago without thinking twice. Buried in that box was a folder I hadn't touched in years, one from the early days of the business, back when we had nothing and everything felt uncertain. Inside that folder was a document I completely forgot existed. Years earlier, when the business was still small and struggling, we needed a way to protect ourselves legally in case anything ever happened to either of us, medically or financially. Back then, it wasn't about ambition. It was about survival. My husband had insisted on filing the business under both our names as founding partners, not out of love, but because at the time, it protected us from certain liabilities if the business failed. I remembered signing that paperwork in a lawyer's office nearly a decade ago, thinking nothing of it, assuming it was just another formality in a long list of financial documents. I stared at that paper in disbelief. My name wasn't just present. It was listed clearly, officially, as a founding co-owner of the company, entitled to equal standing in all major business decisions and holdings, including any future partnerships or investment deals. This wasn't some outdated piece of paper either. It had never been amended, never replaced, never legally removed, because in 10 years of marriage, my husband never once thought I would need to be erased. He never planned for a version of our story where I would leave or where I would need protection. He built our foundation assuming I would always be there, invisible but permanent. I called Michelle into the room, my hands shaking as I showed her the document. She read it twice before looking up at me with wide eyes. She told me I needed a lawyer immediately, that this wasn't just paperwork. This was proof, real legal proof, that I was never just a wife standing in the background. I was, legally and officially, half owner of everything he built. The very next morning, I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carla who specialized in business and family law. She reviewed everything I had, cross-referencing old filings, contracts, and the newly signed $33 million investment deal. Her expression shifted from professional calm to quiet shock as she read through page after page. She told me something I will never forget. She said that legally, none of the new investment deal could move forward without my signature, because I was still an active founding partner in the company. My husband and his lawyers had either overlooked this critical detail, or worse, assumed I would simply disappear quietly without ever checking my own history. That same week, while my husband was likely celebrating his new life with Renee, his investors were preparing final paperwork to formally close the $33 million deal. That's when Carla made a phone call on my behalf, informing them that the deal could not be legally finalized without addressing my ownership stake in the company. I wish I could have seen his face in that moment. I imagine it was a mixture of shock and disbelief, realizing that the woman he threw out like she meant nothing was suddenly standing between him and the biggest deal of his life. Renee, I later learned, was furious, accusing him of lying about having full control of the business. Investors grew nervous, worried about legal complications tied to undisclosed ownership. Within days, my husband's lawyer reached out to mine, requesting an urgent meeting. I remember walking into that meeting with Carla by my side, wearing a simple black dress, feeling more powerful in that moment than I had in years. My husband sat across the table, refusing to meet my eyes at first. Renee sat beside him, arms crossed, clearly irritated by a situation she never anticipated. Their lawyers tried to argue that my ownership was outdated, symbolic at best, expecting me to simply sign it away quietly for a small settlement. But Carla wasn't having it. She laid out every document clearly, explaining that legally, I held equal rights to the company's assets, including anything tied to future deals like the current investment. She made it clear that without my full cooperation, the $33 million deal could collapse entirely, along with his reputation in the business world. I watched my husband's confidence crumble in real time. This was the same man who threw me out without hesitation, who told me I had no claim to anything, who acted like 10 years of my life meant nothing. And now he needed me more than he ever had before. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream or cry or beg for revenge. Instead, I simply told him calmly that I was willing to negotiate, but only on my terms. I wanted fair compensation for every year I contributed to building that business, plus my rightful share as a founding partner. I wanted the truth acknowledged, not hidden behind lawyers and paperwork. And I wanted him to understand, clearly and permanently, that erasing someone's contribution doesn't erase their existence. After weeks of negotiations, I walked away with a settlement that reflected everything I had built, financially securing my future in ways I never imagined possible. More importantly, I walked away with something money could never buy: my dignity fully restored. Renee eventually left him too, unable to handle the instability and public embarrassment the whole situation created. Word got around in their business circles about how he tried to erase his own wife, only to be publicly humbled when the truth surfaced. His reputation took a hit that no amount of money could immediately repair. As for me, I used my settlement to finally return to the career I gave up all those years ago. I started my own small consulting business, helping other women protect themselves financially within relationships and partnerships, something I wish someone had taught me years earlier. I also began speaking publicly about my experience with infertility, helping other women feel less alone in a pain that isolates so many of us silently. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see clearly while I was in the middle of it. My worth was never tied to whether I could have children. My worth was never tied to how much my husband valued me. My worth was something I carried within myself the entire time, even when I felt invisible, even when I felt erased. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: never lose yourself completely in someone else's dreams. Protect your name, your work, and your future, no matter how much you love someone. Loyalty is beautiful, but it should never come at the cost of your own security and self-respect. If this story touched you in any way, I want you to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has given everything to a relationship and feels forgotten. Someone who needs a reminder that their value doesn't disappear just because someone else fails to see it. Follow this channel for more real stories like mine, stories about strength, betrayal, and reclaiming power after loss. And before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought you'd stay silent forever? I'd love to hear your story too, because trust me, we are not alone in this.